We have breaking news. A federal grand jury has returned a superseding indictment in the Trump Washington, D.C. case about election interference to reflect the Supreme Court ruling. I want to go ahead and read a little bit of the notice today that was just filed in court. Today, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia returned a superseding indictment charging the defendant, Donald Trump, with the same criminal offenses that were charged in the original indictment. The superseding indictment, which was presented to a new grand jury that had not previously heard evidence in the case, reflects the government's efforts to respect and implement the Supreme Court's holdings. Remember, the Supreme Court issue from over the summer, a 6-3 decision that former presidents are immune from prosecution.
So, the internet is going absolutely crazy right now with people claiming the Supreme Court just stripped Trump of his immunity. Yeah, you heard that right. Social media is blowing up with posts saying Trump can now be arrested, that his presidential immunity is gone, that this is the beginning of the end for his presidency. Come on, are you kidding me? This is exactly the kind of fake news that drives me insane, because here's the truth, none of that actually happened. There is no Supreme Court ruling in December 2025 that strips President Trump of immunity. None. Zero. It doesn't exist. But somehow, millions of people are sharing these posts like it's breaking news when it's complete garbage. What's really happening is way more interesting than the fake story everyone's spreading. The Supreme Court is actually hearing a case called Trump versus Slaughter on December 8th, and it has absolutely nothing to do with stripping Trump's immunity. Nothing at all. This case is about whether Trump can fire Rebecca Slaughter from the Federal Trade Commission. Yeah, that's right. We're talking about firing a bureaucrat, not arresting a president. But somehow the misinformation machine has turned this into Trump losing his immunity protection. This is wild, and it shows you exactly how desperate Trump's opponents are getting. They're so hungry for any bad news about Trump that they'll literally make stuff up and spread it around like it's fact. And the scary part? People are believing it without even checking if it's true. Let me break down what actually happened, because this is important. Back in July 2024, the Supreme Court made a huge ruling in Trump versus United States. This was the real immunity case, and guess what? Trump won. Big time. The court ruled 6-3 that presidents have absolute immunity for core presidential acts and presumptive immunity for official acts. The only things they're not immune from are completely unofficial acts that have nothing to do with being president. So Trump's immunity is actually stronger than ever, not weaker. But you won't hear that on CNN or MSNBC, obviously. They're too busy pushing the fake narrative that somehow Trump's in trouble. And here's where it gets really crazy. The people spreading this misinformation know it's false. They know there's no December ruling stripping Trump's immunity. They know the Slaughter case is about firing an FTC commissioner, not about presidential immunity. But they're spreading it anyway, because they think if enough people believe the lie, maybe it'll become true somehow. This is the same strategy they used during the entire Biden presidency. Create fake controversies, spread misinformation, hope something sticks. But here's the problem for them. Trump's not some weak politician who's going to fold under pressure. The guy's been dealing with fake news attacks for almost a decade now, and he just keeps getting stronger. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video. The Trump versus Slaughter case is actually fascinating when you understand what's really at stake. This isn't about immunity at all. This is about whether the president can fire independent agency commissioners. Rebecca Slaughter is an FTC commissioner who Trump wants gone, and she's fighting it in court.
Major breaking news from the U.S. Supreme Court on the final day of its term. The High Court has just issued one of its most consequential rulings in recent decades, a decision that not only affects the 2024 race for president following last week's contentious debate, but also the future of the presidency itself from this day forward. Moments ago, the justices ruling on Donald Trump's claim of absolute immunity from criminal prosecution, his core argument in both the 2020 election interference case in Washington, D.C., and the classified documents case in Florida. The court deciding this morning presidents do have immunity for official acts, but there is no immunity for non-official acts. The court then sending it back to the lower courts.
The case is really about executive power and who controls federal agencies. If Trump wins, which he probably will, it means he'll have more control over agencies like the FTC, SEC, and others. If he loses, these agencies stay somewhat independent from presidential control. But immunity? That's not even part of the discussion. What's really happening here is that Trump's opponents are so terrified of his second term that they're creating fake victories to make themselves feel better. They can't attack his policies because they're working. They can't attack his appointments because they're getting confirmed. They can't attack his immunity because the Supreme Court already ruled in his favor. So what do? They make up stories about immunity being stripped and hope people don't fact-check them. This is absolutely pathetic, and it shows you how desperate the anti-Trump crowd has become. And the timing of this fake news is no coincidence. We're getting closer to the 2026 midterms, and Democrats need something, anything, to energize their base. They need their supporters to believe that Trump is somehow vulnerable, that there's still hope of taking him down. So they create these fake stories about immunity being stripped, about arrests being possible, about Trump being in legal jeopardy. But none of it's true. None of it's happening. And when people figure that out, it's going to backfire spectacularly. The real story here isn't about Trump losing immunity. It's about Trump potentially gaining even more power over federal agencies. The Slaughter case could give him the authority to fire commissioners from independent agencies whenever he wants. That's actually a huge expansion of presidential power, not a limitation. But you won't see that headline anywhere because it doesn't fit the narrative that Trump's in trouble. Instead, we get fake news about immunity being stripped and people falling for it because they want it to be true so badly. So buckle up, because this is just the beginning. As we get closer to 2026, the fake news is going to get worse and worse. They'll keep making up stories, keep spreading misinformation, keep hoping something will finally stick. But the truth has a way of coming out, and when it does, it's going to be another massive win for President Trump. Let's dive deeper into this whole mess, because what's happening here is way more significant than just some misinformation on social media. This is about how completely desperate Trump's opponents have become, and honestly, it's getting embarrassing to watch. So we've got people sharing fake stories about the Supreme Court stripping Trump's immunity, when the reality is that Trump's immunity is actually stronger than ever. The July 2024 ruling in Trump versus United States was a massive victory for presidential power. The court ruled 6-3 that presidents have absolute immunity for core presidential acts. That means anything Trump does as part of his official presidential duties is completely protected. He can't be prosecuted for it, he can't be arrested for it, he can't even be investigated for it in most cases. And for official acts that aren't quite core presidential duties, he has presumptive immunity. That means prosecutors have to prove that charging him wouldn't interfere with presidential functions. It's an incredibly high bar, and it protects almost everything a president does in office. The only exception is for completely unofficial acts that have nothing to do with being president. And even then, prosecutors have to prove those acts are totally separate from presidential duties. So Trump's immunity protection is actually broader and stronger than most people realize. But somehow, social media warriors have convinced themselves that this protection has been stripped away. Come on, man. Are you kidding me? Where are people getting this stuff? The answer is, they're getting it from the same sources that told them Trump would never be president again, that he'd be in jail by now, that his administration would collapse within months. These people have been wrong about literally everything, but somehow they still have credibility with their followers. It's absolutely wild. Now let's talk about what's actually happening with the Trump versus Slaughter case, because this is where things get really interesting. Rebecca Slaughter is a commissioner on the Federal Trade Commission, and Trump wants her gone. The FTC is what's called an independent agency, which means commissioners serve fixed terms and traditionally can only be fired for cause. Trump is basically challenging that whole system. He's saying that as president, he should be able to fire any federal official whenever he wants, including these supposedly independent commissioners. And you know what? He's probably right. The Constitution says the president is in charge of the executive branch. It doesn't say anything about independent agencies being exempt from presidential control. That whole system was created by Congress over the years to limit presidential power, but it's not actually in the Constitution. So Trump's legal argument is pretty strong here. If Trump wins this case, and he probably will, it's going to give him massive new powers over federal agencies. He'll be able to fire commissioners from the FTC, SEC, Federal Reserve, and other agencies whenever he wants. That's actually a huge expansion of presidential power, not a limitation. But the media is either ignoring this angle or completely misunderstanding it. They're so focused on spreading fake news about immunity that they're missing the real story. This case could fundamentally reshape how federal agencies work and give Trump way more control over the regulatory state. That's exactly what his supporters want. And it's exactly what his opponents fear. But instead of having an honest discussion about it, we get fake stories about immunity being stripped. And here's what's really crazy about the timing of all this misinformation. The oral arguments for Trump versus Slaughter are scheduled for December 8th. That's next week. So we're about to get a real Supreme Court case with real implications for presidential power. But instead of focusing on that, people are sharing fake stories about immunity. It's like they're so addicted to outrage that they can't even wait for the real news. They have to make stuff up to keep the anger machine running. This is exactly why trust in media has collapsed. When you consistently spread false information, eventually people stop believing anything you say. And that's exactly what's happening here. But let's talk about why this misinformation is spreading so fast, because it tells you everything you need to know about Trump's opponents right now. They're desperate. They've tried everything to take Trump down: impeachments, investigations, criminal cases, civil lawsuits, and nothing has worked. In fact, every attack has made him stronger. So now they're reduced to creating fake victories on social media to make themselves feel better. They need to believe that somewhere, somehow, Trump is losing, even if they have to make it up. The problem is that when you build your worldview on lies, reality has a way of slapping you in the face. Trump's not losing. His immunity isn't being stripped. His powers aren't being limited. In fact, the opposite is happening. The Slaughter case could give him even more power over federal agencies. His approval ratings are solid. His administration is functioning smoothly. His agenda is moving forward. But his opponents can't accept that reality, so they create an alternate version where Trump is somehow in trouble. And the media is making this worse by either ignoring the misinformation or quietly correcting it without making a big deal about how wrong they got it initially. When fake stories about Trump's immunity go viral, where are the fact checkers? Where are the journalists explaining what's actually happening? They're nowhere to be found because correcting misinformation that hurts Trump doesn't fit their narrative. They'd rather let people believe lies than admit that Trump is actually winning on legal fronts. This whole situation perfectly illustrates why Trump won in 2024 and why Republicans are going to dominate in 2026. People are tired of the constant lies, the fake outrage, the manufactured controversies. They want leaders who deal in reality, not fantasy. They want presidents who actually accomplish things, not politicians who spend all their time creating imaginary problems. And that's exactly what Trump represents. Reality over fantasy, results over rhetoric, actual accomplishments over fake victories. The Supreme Court case that's actually happening, Trump versus Slaughter, is a perfect example of how Trump operates. He's not just accepting the traditional limitations on presidential power, he's challenging them in court and winning. He's not just complaining about independent agencies limiting his authority, he's taking them to the Supreme Court and getting real changes. This is how you actually expand presidential power, not through social media posts or fake news stories. And here's the beautiful irony in all of this. While Trump's opponents are sharing fake stories about him losing immunity, he's actually in the process of gaining real power through the courts. While they're celebrating imaginary victories, he's winning actual cases. While they're living in fantasy land, he's reshaping the real world. That's the difference between effective leadership and wishful thinking. So let's break this whole thing down into what actually matters, because there's a lot of confusion out there and we need to get the facts straight. First point, and this is absolutely crucial, President Trump's immunity is not only intact, it's actually stronger than ever before. The July 2024 Supreme Court ruling in Trump versus United States was a massive victory for presidential power. The court ruled 6-3 that presidents have absolute immunity for core presidential acts and presumptive immunity for official acts. This means Trump is protected from prosecution for virtually everything he does as president. The only exception is for completely unofficial acts that have nothing to do with presidential duties, and even then prosecutors face huge hurdles. So when people share stories about Trump's immunity being stripped, they're spreading completely false information. There is no December 2025 ruling that changes any of this. The immunity protection from the 2024 case is still fully in effect. Trump can't be prosecuted for official presidential actions, period. That's the law right now, and it's not changing anytime soon. Second point, the Trump versus Slaughter case that everyone's confusing with immunity has nothing to do with presidential immunity at all. This case is about whether Trump can fire Rebecca Slaughter from the Federal Trade Commission. It's about executive power and agency control, not about immunity protection. The FTC is what's called an independent agency, which means commissioners traditionally serve fixed terms and can only be fired for specific reasons. Trump is challenging this whole system. He's arguing that as president, he should have the authority to fire any federal official, including these supposedly independent commissioners. And honestly, his legal argument is pretty strong. The Constitution puts the president in charge of the executive branch. It doesn't create exceptions for independent agencies. That whole system was basically created by Congress over time to limit presidential power, but it's not actually required by the Constitution. So Trump has a good chance of winning this case. If he does win, it's going to give him enormous new powers over federal agencies. Think about it. He'll be able to fire commissioners from the FTC, Securities and Exchange Commission, Federal Reserve Board, and other major agencies whenever he wants. That's a massive expansion of presidential control over the regulatory state. This isn't about limiting Trump's power, it's about expanding it. But somehow the misinformation machine has turned this into a story about Trump losing immunity. It's completely backwards. The real story is that Trump might be about to gain significant new powers, not lose existing protections. But you won't see that headline anywhere because it doesn't fit the narrative that Trump is somehow in trouble. Third point, this whole misinformation campaign shows you exactly how desperate Trump's opponents have become. They've tried everything else to take him down, and nothing has worked. Impeachments failed. Criminal investigations failed. Civil lawsuits failed. Every attack has just made Trump stronger and more popular, so now they're reduced to creating fake victories on social media. They're so hungry for any bad news about Trump that they'll literally make stuff up and spread it around like it's breaking news. And the scary part is how many people are falling for it. Millions of people are sharing these fake stories without bothering to check if they're actually true. They want to believe Trump is in trouble so badly that they'll believe anything that confirms their wishes. This is exactly the same pattern we saw during Trump's first term. Remember all the stories about how he was about to be arrested, about how his administration was collapsing, about how he was finished politically. None of it was true, but people shared it anyway because they wanted it to be true. And now we're seeing the exact same thing happen again. The only difference is that now Trump is even stronger than before. His legal protections are broader, his political position is more secure, and his opponents are more desperate than ever. Fourth point, and this might be the most important one, this whole episode perfectly illustrates why Trump keeps winning while his opponents keep losing. Trump deals in reality. When he wants to expand presidential power, he takes real cases to real courts and gets real rulings. When he wants to fire federal officials, he challenges the legal barriers through the proper system. He doesn't just complain on social media or create fake controversies. He actually does the work to change things. Meanwhile, his opponents are stuck in fantasy land. They create fake victories, spread false information, and convince themselves that somehow Trump is losing when the exact opposite is happening. They're so disconnected from reality that they can't even see how badly they're failing. And here's what makes this even more pathetic. The real Trump versus Slaughter case is actually fascinating and important. This could fundamentally reshape how federal agencies work. It could give Trump the power to fire commissioners who are blocking his agenda. It could eliminate one of the biggest obstacles to presidential control over the regulatory state. But instead of having a serious discussion about these real issues, we get fake news about immunity being stripped. It's like Trump's opponents are so addicted to outrage that they can't even focus on actual news when it's happening right in front of them. The timing of all this fake news is also telling. We're getting closer to the 2026 midterms, and Democrats desperately need something to energize their base. They need their supporters to believe that Trump is vulnerable somehow, that there's still hope of stopping him, so they create these elaborate fantasies about immunity being stripped and legal troubles mounting. But none of it's true. Trump's immunity is intact, his legal position is strong, his political standing is solid, and cases like Trump versus Slaughter might actually give him even more power, not less. This whole situation shows you exactly why Trump won in 2024 and why Republicans are going to dominate in 2026. People are tired of the constant lies and fake outrage. They want leaders who deal with reality and get actual results. They want presidents who expand their power through legitimate legal channels, not politicians who spend all their time creating imaginary problems on social media. And that's exactly what Trump represents. So what's next? Well, we'll find out on December 8th when the Supreme Court hears oral arguments in Trump versus Slaughter. This is the real case with real implications for presidential power, not the fake immunity stripping story that's circulating on social media. If Trump wins, which he probably will, it'll be another massive expansion of presidential authority, and his opponents will probably create more fake news to cope with another loss. Because that's all they have left, fake victories to distract from real defeats. The bottom line is this: Trump's immunity isn't going anywhere. His power is actually growing, and his opponents are getting more desperate and disconnected from reality every day. That's not exactly a recipe for success in 2026, but it sure makes for entertaining political theater. This is going to be one wild ride, and we're just getting started with the real action. Get ready for more fake news, more desperate attacks, and more real victories for President Trump.